I'm Zane Sullivan, 32 CEO of a $50 million tech company that started from nothing but my broken dreams and determination. Family betrayal shaped my journey when my parents claimed they couldn't help with my rent during college, but paid off my younger brother's massive credit card debt without hesitation. That double standard changed everything. I disappeared, built my life from scratch, and found success beyond anything they could imagine. Before I tell you how I came face to face with my father years later in the lobby of my own company, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to make it on your own. Growing up in suburban Michigan, my childhood looked normal from the outside. We lived in a modest 4-bedroom house with a well-kept lawn that my father Richard meticulously maintained every weekend. Mom Deborah worked part-time at the local library, while Dad built his career as a sales manager at an automotive parts supplier. Our family of 4 completed the picture of middle-class American normalcy, but beneath that surface ran currents of favoritism that would eventually sweep away any sense of family I once had. Logan arrived 2 years after me, and from the beginning, he commanded attention. While I was the quiet, thoughtful child who could entertain himself for hours, Logan needed constant engagement. My parents seemed to find his demanding nature endearing rather than exhausting. "Your brother just has a bigger personality," my mother would say, when I questioned why he got away with behaviors I never could. As children, Logan and I were actually close. We built elaborate forts in the basement, rode bikes around the neighborhood until streetlights came on, and defended each other against neighborhood bullies. I remember teaching him how to throw a baseball properly, spending hours in the backyard until his aim improved. Those moments of brotherhood remain some of my clearer childhood memories. Everything changed when I turned 12 and developed an interest in computers. My uncle Marcus gave me his old desktop as a birthday present. It wasn't anything special, just a chunky beige machine that made strange whirring noises when it started up, but it opened a whole new world for me. Within weeks, I was taking it apart, figuring out how each component worked, and putting it back together. My uncle noticed my curiosity and began teaching me basic coding on weekend visits. "That's a nice hobby, Zane," my father commented when he saw me programming, "but don't let it distract from your schoolwork." Despite maintaining straight, as he viewed my computer interests as frivolous. Meanwhile, Logan struggled academically, but excelled socially. By high school, he was wildly popular playing basketball, dating the prettiest girls, getting invited to every party. His charm compensated for his mediocre grades, at least in my parents' eyes. When he got detention for skipping class, Dad just chuckled and said boys will be boys. When he failed algebra twice, Mom hired him a tutor without complaint. The double standard was impossible to ignore. Logan's financial irresponsibility emerged early. At 16, he crashed the car my parents bought him for his birthday, a far nicer vehicle than the used sedan I received at the same age. They replaced it within a month. When he emptied his savings account to buy an expensive leather jacket and concert tickets, my parents covered his insurance payment that month without lecture. Each bailout reinforced his behavior while I watched from the sidelines, saving my earnings from a part-time job at the local electronics store. "Your brother just needs more guidance," Mom would say when I questioned their decisions. "You've always been so responsible, Zane." They wielded my self-sufficiency like a weapon against me. Being reliable somehow translated to needing less support, less attention, less investment. The pattern was set long before college applications began. During my junior year of high school, I dedicated myself to coding projects, building simple games and websites for local businesses. I developed an inventory management system for the electronics store, where I worked, which the owner implemented and paid me $500 for my first real programming paycheck. I rushed home, excited to share my achievement. "That's nice," Dad said, barely looking up from his newspaper. "Just remember that playing with computers isn't a real career path." That same evening, they celebrated enthusiastically when Logan announced he'd scored the winning basket at his basketball game. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Despite discouragement, I applied to top computer science programs across the country. When acceptance letters arrived from several prestigious universities, including one with a partial scholarship, my parents' response was tepid at best. "That's pretty far from home," Mom noted concern in her voice. And even with that scholarship, it's going to be expensive. 2 months later, when Logan was accepted to the state university, 20 minutes from our house, they threw a party. They invited extended family-ordered catering, and my father made a toast celebrating the next chapter of Logan's bright future. For my acceptance, we had pizza. The summer before college, the dynamic between Logan and me shifted further. Our childhood closeness had already faded, but now a competitive edge crept in, though the competition existed only in my mind. Logan never saw me as a rival. He simply accepted his favorable position as the natural order of things. "Don't worry so much," he told me, when I mentioned the disparity in our parents' treatment. "You know how mom and dad are. They just get me more, you know." I did know. That was precisely the problem. By the time I packed my bags for college, I had developed a kind of resigned independence. I had been preparing to stand on my own 2 feet for years, not because I wanted to, but because I'd never known another way. What I didn't realize was how completely that self-reliance would be tested in the years to come, or how the lessons in family betrayal were just beginning. My first semester at university felt like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. Suddenly, my interest in computer science wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. Professors recognized my potential classmates, sought my help with projects, and for the first time, I felt truly seen. My partial scholarship covered about 40% of my tuition, and I'd saved enough from my high school job to manage the first semester's expenses alongside it. Reality hit during the second semester, when my savings began to dwindle. I found work at the campus IT department 20 hours weekly, while carrying a full course load. Sleep became a luxury as I balanced debugging network issues during the day and completing advanced algorithms assignments at night. Still, I made it work. My grades remained strong, and I even joined the competitive programming club, where I met students as passionate about code as I was. By sophomore year, tuition increased by 8%, an adjustment the university announced via a politely worded email that might as well have been a punch to the gut. My scholarship remained fixed at the original amount. The math was simple and brutal. I needed more money. I added another job waiting tables at an off-campus restaurant on weekends. The physical toll of being on my feet for 8-hour shifts after weeks hunched over a computer was exhausting, but the tips were decent. Between both jobs, I managed to cover tuition and basic expenses, though my emergency fund was non-existent. Living in the dorms had been convenient, but expensive. When junior year approached, I found more affordable, off-campus housing with 2 other students, Julia, a brilliant linguistics major, and Marcus, a civil engineering student with a dry sense of humor that made even all-night study sessions bearable. Our apartment was a 20-minute walk from campus, farther than ideal, but worth the savings of $300 monthly compared to dorm costs. Then came the email that would set everything in motion. The university announced another tuition increase, this 112%, citing facility improvements and faculty salary adjustments. The same day, my landlord informed us that rent would increase by $150 monthly upon lease renewal. I stared at my budget spreadsheet late that night, running calculations again and again, hoping for a different result. There wasn't one. Even working both jobs at maximum hours, I would fall short by about $400 monthly. Taking more hours would mean dropping classes, extending my time in college, and ultimately costing more. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 3 days of minimal sleep and maximum anxiety, I made the call I'd been avoiding. My father answered on the 4th ring. "Dad," I said, after exchanging brief pleasantries, "I need to talk to you and Mom about something important." That weekend, I took the bus home, rehearsing my approach the entire 6-hour journey. I wouldn't beg. I would present the situation, factually outline my efforts to address it independently, and request a temporary loan, not a handout, to cover the deficit until I could find additional work or scholarship opportunities. My parents listened silently at the kitchen table as I explained my situation spreadsheets and budget calculations spread before them. "I've applied for additional scholarships, but decisions won't come through for months," I explained. "I've increased my work hours as much as possible without affecting my grades. I just need help for the next semester or 2. Maybe $2,000 total. I'll pay back every cent after graduation." The silence that followed felt eternal. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Zane, we understand you're in a tough spot, but our finances are pretty tight right now too," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "With property taxes going up and some unexpected expenses, we just don't have extra cash available." My mother nodded, adding softly, "Maybe you should consider taking a semester off working full-time to save up then going back. Lots of students do that." The suggestion felt like a slap. A semester off would mean losing momentum, potentially losing my scholarship, and extending time to graduation. They knew this. I had explained the domino effect such a decision would trigger. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Not really. I'll figure something out." The discussion ended there. They changed the subject to Logan's fraternity activities, and I nodded along already, mentally calculating which courses I might need to drop to accommodate more work hours. Back at my apartment, Julia found me staring blankly at my laptop, attempting to revise my course schedule. "That bad?" she asked, sitting beside me on our secondhand couch. I nodded, explaining my parents' response. "That's rough," she said, genuine concern in her voice. "But listen, I saw a posting for a remote programming internship that pays pretty well. The hours are flexible, and it's exactly in your field. You should apply." She forwarded me the listing for a position with a tech startup looking for part-time programmers who could work remotely on their developing applications. The pay was better than both my current jobs combined, and the flexible hours meant I could potentially maintain my full course load. I spent that entire night perfecting my application, showcasing the projects I'd completed both for courses and independently. 3 days later, I received a request for a video interview. 2 days after that, I was offered the position. The internship was demanding but fascinating. I was writing actual production code for a developing application rather than just completing academic exercises. My supervisor, Daniel, recognized my abilities and gradually assigned me more complex tasks. For the first time, I felt like a professional programmer rather than just a student. The new income solved my immediate financial crisis. I was able to drop my campus IT job, but kept the weekend restaurant position as a safety net. My schedule remained brutal: classes during the day, programming until late at night, waiting tables on weekends, but it was sustainable, at least temporarily. Julia became my biggest supporter during this period. She'd leave coffee on my desk when I was coding, until Dawn proofread my technical documentation when my eyes were too blurred from exhaustion to catch errors, and forced me to take breaks when I'd gone too long without one. "You're going to burn out if you keep this pace," she warned one night, physically closing my laptop. The human brain needs rest to function properly. That's not just kindness talking, it's scientific fact. She was right, of course. We developed a routine where she'd drag me out for coffee or a walk around the neighborhood at least twice weekly. During those breaks, we'd talk about everything except work and school, movies, books, childhood stories, future dreams. Those conversations kept me grounded when everything else felt like shifting sand. As the semester progressed, my internship supervisors were impressed enough with my work that they hinted at the possibility of full-time employment after graduation. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel hopeful about the future. I wouldn't need to ask my parents for help again. I would manage on my own, just as I always had. What I didn't realize then was how completely that independence would be tested, or how soon the true betrayal would reveal itself. Spring break of junior year arrived with unexpected warmth, both in temperature and my outlook. My remote position had become more secure, with increased responsibilities and slightly higher pay. I'd managed to maintain my GPA despite the punishing schedule, and for the first time in months, I felt I could breathe. I decided to spend part of the break at home, partly to save on grocery money, and partly because, despite everything, I missed my family. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when no one was expected home. Using my key, I let myself in, planning to surprise my mother when she returned from her library shift. The house was quiet, but for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of voices coming from my father's home office. He wasn't supposed to be home mid-afternoon on a weekday. Curious, I moved toward the partially open door. "The interest rates are killing him," my father was saying, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when making important decisions. $25,000 at 22% interest. He'll never get out from under that on his own. My mother's voice followed, concerned, but resigned. I know, but can we really afford to pay it all off at once? What about our savings? We'll manage, my father replied firmly. Logan needs a fresh start. He can't begin his career with this hanging over him. The credit card companies are calling him daily. I froze in the hallway, processing what I was hearing. $25,000. Logan. Credit card debt. The pieces arranged themselves in my mind, with sickening clarity. What about the money we set aside for the kitchen renovation, my mother asked. We'll postpone that. This is more important. Logan made some mistakes, but he's young. Everyone deserves a second chance to start fresh. The conversation continued, but blood rushing in my ears drowned out the details. The same month they claimed they couldn't spare $2,000 to help me stay in school. They were preparing to pay off my brother's $25,000 credit card debt he'd accumulated through parties, spring break, trips, and frivolous spending, according to what I could gather from their conversation. I must have made some sound, because the voices stopped abruptly. My father appeared at the office door, surprise registering on his face, before he composed it into a welcoming smile. Zane, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. He stepped forward for a hug that I mechanically returned, my body operating on autopilot while my mind raced. I caught an earlier bus, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. My mother appeared behind him, her expression brightening. What a lovely surprise. Are you hungry? I can make you something before dinner? I followed them to the kitchen, in a daze, watching them perform normalcy, while the conversation I'd overheard replayed in my mind. They chatted about my classes, about neighborhood news, about everything except what really mattered. I answered on autopilot, waiting for the right moment. It came during dinner when Logan arrived, greeting me with genuine surprise and enthusiasm, before launching into stories about his fraternity's latest exploits. I sat silently pushing food around my plate, gathering courage. So I finally said during a lull in conversation, my voice cutting through the ambient dining room noise, $25,000 in credit card debt, Logan. The table went silent. Logan's fork froze midway to his mouth. My father's expression hardened into the stern look I knew well. My mother looked down at her plate. That's a private matter, my father said firmly. Is it? Because 3 months ago, when I asked for a $2,000 loan to stay in school, a loan I promised to repay you, told me finances were too tight to help. That was a lie, wasn't it? Logan had the decency to look embarrassed, setting down his fork and avoiding my gaze. My father's face flushed red, but my mother spoke first. It's not the same situation, Zane. Your brother made some mistakes and I didn't. I interrupted something I rarely did with my mother. My mistake was believing you would support both your sons equally. My mistake was thinking that working 2 jobs, while maintaining a 3.9 GPA, deserved the same consideration as maxing out credit cards on parties. That's enough, my father snapped. You've always been responsible, Zane. You've always found a way to manage on your own. Logan needs more guidance. There it was again, my self-sufficiency used against me. I laughed bitterly. Right. I'm responsible, so I deserve less support. Logan's irresponsible, so he deserves more. Do you realize how backward that is? You don't understand the whole situation, my father insisted. Then explain it to me, I challenged. Explain why his $25,000 party debt deserves your financial rescue, but my education doesn't. The silence that followed contained my answer. There was no explanation that would make sense, no justification that wouldn't reveal the painful truth. They simply valued his needs above mine, and always had. Computer science isn't even a real degree program, my father finally said, his voice dismissive. It's just playing with computers. Logan is pursuing business administration, something practical that will lead to a real career. The statement hung in the air between us, so nakedly revealing that even my mother winced. Richard, that's not fair, she said quietly. But the damage was done. Years of accumulated small hurts crystallized around that single statement, hardening into something immovable within my chest. I stood slowly, placing my napkin beside my barely touched dinner. Thank you for clarifying where I stand. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I won't bother you for help again. I packed my bag that night despite my mother's tearful pleas to stay the full week as planned. Logan attempted awkward apologies that never quite acknowledged the fundamental unfairness of the situation. My father remained in his office, emerging only when he heard me preparing to leave the next morning. "You're overreacting," he said, standing in the foyer as I shouldered my backpack. "Families go through difficult patches. When you're older, you'll understand that sometimes parents have to make complicated decisions." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "I'm just not a priority." Message received. The bus ride back to campus was a blur. I texted Julia, needing a friendly face when I arrived. She was waiting at the apartment when I returned concern written across her features. "You're back early," she said as I dropped my bag in our small living room. I told her everything. The conversation I'd overheard. The confrontation, my father's dismissal of my education. She listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to anger on my behalf. "That's beyond unfair," she said when I finished. "It's not just about the money, it's what it represents." Exactly, I agreed, feeling understood for the first time since overhearing that conversation. They've shown me where I stand in the family hierarchy. Now I need to decide what to do with that information. Julia was quiet for a moment, considering. "What are you thinking?" I looked around our modest apartment at the textbooks stacked on the coffee table at the whiteboard, covered with programming notes at the laptop where I'd been building my skills despite every obstacle. "I'm thinking it's time I stop expecting anything from them," I said finally. "It's time to become completely self-sufficient." That night marked a turning point. The betrayal hurt deeply, but it also freed me from the illusion that my family would ever be the support system I needed. That realization, painful as it was, would ultimately propel me toward decisions I might never have made otherwise. The morning after returning to campus, I met with my academic advisor to discuss options. Dropping to part-time student status would allow me to work more hours without completely abandoning my degree progress. It would extend my graduation timeline, but with my remote programming position, I could increase my hours immediately. "Are you sure about this, Zane Professor Harrington?" asked concern evident in his expression. "You're one of our most promising students. Taking longer to graduate isn't ideal for momentum." "I don't have much choice," I replied, explaining my financial situation without delving into family dynamics. This way, I can continue making progress while supporting myself completely. He nodded reluctantly, helping me identify which courses to prioritize in my revised schedule. As I left his office, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't trying to maintain the impossible balance of full-time studies and nearly full-time work. I was making a choice that acknowledged reality. That same day, I contacted Daniel at my remote job and requested additional hours. His response exceeded my expectations. "Actually, we've been impressed with your work," he wrote. "We'd like to offer you a full-time position with benefits, understanding that you're still completing your degree. We can be flexible with hours as long as deadlines are met." The offer included a salary that would cover all my expenses with room to spare more money than I'd ever had access to at once. I accepted immediately, feeling a strange mix of excitement and lingering anger. This opportunity had come not because of family support, but despite its absence. Once my employment was secured, a more radical idea took shape. Nothing tied me to this specific location except the university, and with my revised course schedule, most of my classes could be completed online. Only 2 required periodic in-person sessions. "What if I moved," I mentioned to Julia one evening, "somewhere with lower cost of living where my salary would go further? I could fly back for the required in-person sessions." She looked up from her linguistics textbook, surprised. "You're serious?" "Completely. There's nothing keeping me here except these walls, and frankly, they're overpriced." Julia was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What about your family? Would you tell them?" I considered this carefully. My mother, yes. Eventually. My father and Logan. They don't get to know where I am or what I'm doing anymore. That's the privilege of people who care. Over the next 2 weeks, I researched locations settling on Austin, Texas. The tech scene was growing, cost of living was reasonable compared to other tech hubs, and the climate would be a welcome change from Michigan winters. I found a small one-bedroom apartment in North Austin, signed the lease electronically, and gave notice to my current landlord. I told only Julia and Marcus my detailed plans, swearing them to secrecy. For my parents, I left a deliberately vague message: I've accepted a full-time position while completing my degree remotely. My new contact information is below. I provided my new phone number but no address. My mother called immediately. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was predictably concerned, but respected my boundaries. 2 weeks later, I packed everything I owned into my used Honda Civic and drove the 18 hours to Austin, stopping only for gas and quick meals. The journey felt symbolic, every mile increasing the distance from disappointment toward possibility. My new apartment was smaller than the one I'd shared with roommates, but entirely mine. I set up my workstation by the window, overlooking a small courtyard with a single oak tree. That first night alone in Austin, I slept more soundly than I had in months, perhaps years. The transition to full-time work while studying part-time proved easier than anticipated. Daniel and the team respected my class schedule, and the flexible hours meant I could attend virtual lectures without conflict. My courses were challenging but engaging, and for the first time, I wasn't constantly exhausted from overwork. Austin offered opportunities for a fresh social start as well. During a company virtual happy hour, I mentioned I'd relocated to Austin, and 2 coworkers, Adam and Sophia, immediately messaged that they lived there too. "We should meet up in real life," Sophia suggested. "There's an excellent coffee shop near the river that's perfect for remote workers." That weekend I met them at the recommended location. Adam was a gregarious software developer with a booming laugh and endless enthusiasm for obscure programming languages. Sophia was a UX designer with a sharp wit and practical perspective on the industry. Both had moved to Austin within the past year, seeking the same combination of tech opportunity and affordable living. "The best thing about starting over somewhere new," Sophia commented, as we settled at an outdoor table, "is that you get to decide who you want to be here. Your past doesn't define you unless you let it." Her words resonated more than she could know. In Austin, no one saw me as the responsible but less favored son. No one compared me to a golden child brother. I was simply Zane, programmer student, new Austinite. Over the following months, my friendship with Adam and Sophia deepened. We established a routine of weekly dinners, rotating apartments. When they discovered I knew little about cooking beyond microwave basics, they took turns teaching me simple recipes. Sophia introduced me to proper knife techniques and the importance of fresh ingredients. Adam specialized in what he called bachelor gourmet impressive meals with minimal effort and equipment. These small gatherings became anchors in my week, reminders that family could be chosen rather than merely inherited. The contrast between these supportive relationships and my biological family couldn't have been clearer. Communication with my family dwindled to occasional text exchanges with my mother. She respected my boundaries, but periodically asked when I might visit. I deflected gently, always citing work commitments. Logan texted a few times, superficial messages that never acknowledged our last conversation. I responded with equal superficiality. My father's single attempt at contact, a terse email about tax dependency status, received a factual response, and nothing more. Meanwhile, my professional skills developed rapidly. Working full-time on real-world projects accelerated my learning beyond what academic exercises could provide. Daniel recognized this growth, assigning me increasingly complex tasks and including me in architectural decisions. By the time my revised graduation date approached, I had already advanced to senior developer status within the company. Completing my degree took 18 months longer than originally planned, but when the final grades posted, the accomplishment felt entirely mine. I had earned every credit through my own effort, financed every course through my own work. The university offered to mail my diploma, but I chose to attend the graduation ceremony not for myself, but as a definitive period at the end of this chapter of my life. Julia flew to Austin the week before graduation, staying in my apartment's small guest area. We drove to Michigan together, a road trip filled with music and conversations about future plans. She had accepted a position with a linguistics technology company in California. "You could come too, you know," she suggested as we crossed the Oklahoma border. "Silicon Valley would snap you up in a heartbeat with your experience." Maybe someday, I replied. Right now, I'm happy in Austin. It feels like home in a way Michigan never did. The graduation ceremony itself was anticlimactic, thousands of students crossing a stage in alphabetical order. When they called Zane Sullivan, I walked across, accepted the diploma case, and looked out at the crowd. Julia cheered loudly from the general seating area. My family was notably absent, though I'd informed my mother of the date. Later, I found a text from her explaining that Logan's job interview had been scheduled the same weekend, requiring their presence for moral support. The news didn't hurt as much as it might have once. That evening, Julia organized a small celebration dinner with a few classmates who'd remained friends despite my move. We toasted to futures unknown, but promising to lessons learned through hardship to resilience. It felt more meaningful than any family celebration could have been. Back in Austin, with my degree officially complete, I threw myself fully into my work. The company was growing rapidly, and my responsibilities expanded accordingly. During one late-night coding session, working on a particularly challenging security implementation, I had an insight that would ultimately change everything. What if we approached this from the opposite direction I mentioned to Adam during our next coffee meetup? Instead of building walls around data, what if we made the data itself secure regardless of its environment? I sketched the concept on a napkin, a fundamentally different approach to digital security that would allow information to remain protected even when shared across platforms. Adam's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. That's revolutionary, he said slowly. Have you mentioned this to Daniel? Not yet. It's still just a concept. Adam shook his head. This isn't just a feature enhancement for the current platform. This could be its own product entirely. His excitement mirrored my own growing conviction that this idea had potential beyond my current employment. For the first time, I considered a path I'd never seriously entertained before: entrepreneurship. The transformation was complete. From the struggling student depending on parental support that never materialized, I had become not just self-sufficient, but innovative, confident, connected. The betrayal that once defined me had become merely the catalyst for something greater than I might otherwise have built. The decision to leave my secure position to pursue an unproven concept wasn't made lightly. I spent 3 months developing the idea during evenings and weekends, building a functional prototype that demonstrated the core technology. When it performed even better than expected in initial tests, I knew it was time to take the risk. I'm thinking of starting my own company, I told Adam during one of our regular dinners. Based on that security concept I showed you, he set down his fork, expression serious. I've been hoping you'd say that. Actually, I've been thinking about it since you first showed me the napkin sketch. Really? Really? And I want in. I've got savings. I understand the concept and I believe in its potential. He leaned forward, eyes bright with enthusiasm. We could do this, Zane. His confidence bolstered my own. The next day, I submitted my resignation, expressing gratitude for the opportunity, but explaining my need to pursue this new direction. Daniel was disappointed but understanding. The industry needs more innovators, he said during our final meeting. Keep in touch. You never know when our paths might cross again. Adam resigned the following week, and we immediately converted his garage into our makeshift headquarters. We established a legal entity, filed preliminary patents on the core technology, and began developing a comprehensive business plan. Our days stretched from early morning until well past midnight, fueled by coffee and the particular energy that comes from building something from nothing. The initial phase was exhilarating, but challenging. Our savings dwindled faster than anticipated as we purchased necessary equipment and legal services. 3 months in with our prototype, functional, but our bank accounts nearing empty, we needed investment. Our first pitch to a local angel investor group was a disaster. I stumbled over technical explanations, failing to translate complex concepts into accessible language. Adam attempted to recover, but couldn't fully bridge the gap. We left without funding, discouraged, but determined to improve. We need to tell a story, Adam reflected, as we drove back to his garage office. They don't need to understand every technical detail, but they need to understand why this matters. We spent the next week refining our presentation, practicing relentlessly. Our second pitch to a different investor group went better, but still resulted in rejection, this time due to concerns about market size. Your technology is interesting, one investor told us afterward, But the application seems limited. Think bigger. Those words sparked an important realization. We had been thinking of our security approach as a niche product for specific industries when its potential applications were actually much broader. Our breakthrough came unexpectedly through Sophia, who had remained a close friend and occasional advisor. During a frustrated venting session over drinks, she made a suggestion that changed everything. "You keep talking about this as a security product," she observed, "but what you're really creating is trust. In a digital world where nothing feels secure anymore, you're offering certainty. That's not just a feature, it's a fundamental value proposition." Her perspective shifted our entire approach. We rewrote our business plan, expanded our vision, and prepared for another attempt at securing investment. Our seventh pitch meeting introduced us to Natalie Chen, a former cybersecurity executive turned angel investor. Unlike previous investors, she immediately grasped both the technical innovation and its market potential. "This solves a problem that's keeping CEOs awake at night," she said, after our presentation. "I want to be part of it." Her initial investment of $200,000 allowed us to move operations from Adam's garage to a small office space, purchase better equipment, and hire our first additional developer. More importantly, her industry connections opened doors previously inaccessible to us. The following months were a whirlwind of development, testing, and refinement. Our core security algorithm performed exceptionally in controlled tests, but implementing it across various platforms presented unexpected challenges. There were nights I slept on the office couch, rather than waste time commuting home coding until my vision blurred, then catching a few hours of sleep before starting again. Despite the grueling pace, I felt more alive than ever. Every problem solved was mine, not an assignment for a professor or a task for an employer, but a creation bringing my own vision to life. When frustration mounted, I sometimes thought of my father's dismissive words about just playing with computers and found renewed determination to prove him wrong. 6 months after Natalie's initial investment, we faced our most significant hurdle yet. A major potential client was interested in implementing our security system, but they required modifications that would strain our limited resources. Successfully delivering would establish crucial credibility. Failing would damage our reputation before we truly entered the market. "It's a calculated risk," Adam argued during a tense strategy meeting. "We'd be extending ourselves thin, but the potential upside is enormous." "We need more developers," I countered. "Quality can't be compromised, especially not on our first major implementation." Natalie, who had become a trusted advisor, suggested a compromise, seeking additional investment specifically tied to this opportunity. With her connections, we secured a meeting with Vertex Capital, a venture capital firm specializing in security technologies. Their investment process was rigorous and exhausting. Weeks of due diligence, technical evaluations, and financial projections. When they finally offered $4 million in exchange for 20% equity, we celebrated by ordering champagne to the office and drinking it from paper cups. The funding allowed us to hire a proper development team, including Julia, who had become disillusioned with her position in California. Her linguistics background proved unexpectedly valuable for creating intuitive interfaces for our security systems. Having her join the company felt like completing a circle. The friend who had supported me through my lowest point was now part of building something remarkable. With adequate resources finally available, development accelerated dramatically. We successfully delivered for our first major client, who became an enthusiastic reference, opening doors to larger opportunities. Industry publications began mentioning our company as an innovative newcomer in the security space. Within 18 months of Natalie's initial investment, we had 28 employees, a proper office in downtown Austin, and a growing list of clients implementing our technology. The day our company valuation exceeded $10 million, Adam brought a bottle of expensive whiskey to the office. To proving everyone wrong, he toasted, pouring 2 glasses in our shared office after hours. Including ourselves, I added, thinking of how impossible this outcome would have seemed during those difficult days in college. As our success grew, I made a decision that surprised even me. I chose to open a satellite office in Detroit, deliberately close to my hometown, but not directly in it. When Adam questioned the business rationale, I was honest. "It's partly strategic. There's solid tech talent in the region, at lower cost than the coasts. But it's also personal. I want to build something successful in the place I left behind." He understood without further explanation. The Detroit office opened 6 months later, focusing primarily on client implementation and support. By our 5th year, the company had expanded to 300 employees across 4 offices. Our security system had been implemented by major corporations across industries, and acquisition offers began arriving regularly. We declined them, all committed to maintaining independence and control over our creation. The business press took notice, with several articles profiling our meteoric rise. One business magazine included me in their 30 under 30 list, with a photo and brief biography mentioning my Michigan origins and computer science background. I didn't seek publicity, but Natalie insisted it was important for company visibility. "Success is the best revenge," she told me when I expressed discomfort with the attention. Though that's probably not the healthiest way to think about it. She was right, of course. Despite everything I'd achieved, part of me still measured success against that painful family dynamic. I hadn't spoken to my father in years. Communication with my mother had dwindled to birthday texts and occasional brief calls. Logan and I exchanged perfunctory holiday greetings, but nothing more. As our company approached its 5th anniversary, valued at just over $50 million, I found myself at an unexpected crossroads. The business was stable, profitable, and growing. The wounds that had driven me had scarred over, no longer raw, but still visible if you knew where to look. What I didn't anticipate was how directly those worlds would collide, or how unprepared I would be when they did. The Detroit office required periodic attention from headquarters, particularly as we implemented new client systems in the region. Typically, I sent other executives to handle these visits, maintaining my deliberate distance from Michigan. When a particularly important client requested the CEO's personal involvement, however, I couldn't reasonably decline. 3 days maximum, I told our executive assistant Patricia as she arranged the trip. Schedule everything as efficiently as possible. I arrived on a Monday morning, heading directly from the airport to our Detroit office. The space occupied the 15th floor of a recently renovated building downtown, modern, open, and deliberately impressive. As CEO, I had a designated office there, though I rarely used it. The first 2 days passed in a blur of client meetings, team reviews, and strategic planning sessions. By Wednesday morning, my final day, I was already mentally back in Austin, reviewing notes from the previous day's meetings as I walked through the lobby toward the elevators. "I'm looking for information about Zane Sullivan," a familiar voice said from the reception desk. "I was told he might work here." I froze mid-step, the voice activating memories I'd carefully compartmentalized for years. Slowly, I turned toward the reception desk, where my father stood speaking with Sarah, our front office manager. He hadn't changed much, perhaps more gray at the temples, slightly thicker around the middle, but unmistakably Richard Sullivan. He wore a suit that seemed slightly too formal for the occasion, suggesting special effort had been made for this visit. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor despite the awkward situation. "May I ask what this is regarding? Do you have an appointment with Mr. Sullivan?" "No appointment," my father replied. "I'm his father. I saw the magazine article about the company and realized, well, I wanted to speak with him." I could have walked away. The elevator was 10 steps to my right. He hadn't seen me yet. I could have disappeared upstairs, instructed Sarah to say I was unavailable, avoided this confrontation entirely. Instead, I approached the desk. "Hello, Dad." He turned surprise, registering before composure returned. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether to extend his hand or attempt a hug. He did neither. "Zane," he said finally, "you look different." I had changed, of course. The uncertain college student had been replaced by someone with the particular confidence that comes from building something successful. My wardrobe had upgraded from student budget to executive appropriate. Even my posture had changed with the weight of responsibilities and achievements. "It's been 7 years," I replied evenly. "That happens." Sarah glanced between us, professional enough not to show curiosity, but clearly sensing the tension. "Would you like to use your office, Mr. Sullivan?" "That won't be necessary," I began, then reconsidered. "Actually, yes. For 15 minutes. I turned to my father. "Follow me." The elevator ride to the 15th floor was silent. I led him through the open office area where employees glanced up curiously as we passed. My office featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Detroit River, a deliberate choice for the best view in the building. "Nice space," my father commented, as I closed the door behind us. "Very impressive." "What are you doing here, Dad?" I asked, remaining standing rather than taking my seat behind the desk. He hesitated, seeming to recalibrate whatever speech he had prepared. "I saw the article about your company. $50 million valuation, CEO and founder." Pride briefly flickered across his features before uncertainty returned. "I had no idea." "That was intentional," I replied. "I didn't want you to know." The bluntness of my statement visibly startled him. "Zane, I understand you were upset about what happened, but it's been years. Families should—" "Why are you really here?" I interrupted. "After all this time, why now?" He sighed heavily, finally abandoning whatever script he'd planned. "I lost my job," he admitted. "The company downsized, eliminated my entire department. At my age, finding comparable employment has been challenging." The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had dismissed my career choice was now seeking employment from the industry he'd belittled. I said nothing, waiting. "Your mother's been having health issues too," he continued. "Nothing immediately life-threatening, but ongoing treatment is expensive, especially with reduced insurance coverage since I lost my position." "And Logan?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "He's had some setbacks," my father acknowledged. "The job market in his field isn't what we expected. He's living with us temporarily while he gets back on his feet." Translation: the golden child's business degree hadn't delivered as promised, and he'd returned to the safety net always available to him. "So you saw my success in a magazine and thought—" I let the sentence hang unfinished. My father straightened, some of his old authority returning. "I thought I should reconnect with my son. Is that so unreasonable? Whatever disagreements we had in the past, we're still family." "Family," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. Funny how that concept applies when you need something from me. Where was that family loyalty when I needed help with rent? "That was different," he began the old justifications, rising automatically. "No, it wasn't," I cut in. "It was exactly the same, except the person needing help was me instead of Logan. The only difference was your willingness to provide it." He flushed anger briefly, replacing discomfort. "You've clearly done fine without our help. Better than fine. Maybe that proves we made the right decision." The statement was so backwards, so perfectly illustrative of the twisted logic that had shaped my childhood, that I actually laughed. "That's your takeaway? That denying me support was somehow responsible for my success? That's not parenting, Dad. That's abandonment with a convenient retroactive justification." A knock at the door interrupted whatever response he might have offered. Sarah opened it, slightly apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Sullivan, but your conference call with Austin begins in 5 minutes. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be right there." I turned back to my father. "I have to get back to work." "Zane, please," he said, desperation finally breaking through his composed exterior. "Can we meet for dinner? Talk properly? Your mother would love to see you." I studied him, this man, who had shaped so much of my life, through his presence and absence. The anger I expected to feel had been replaced by something else. Not quite pity, not quite indifference, but a detached recognition of his humanity and limitations. "I'm flying back to Austin this evening," I said finally. "I don't think dinner would be productive for either of us." "Then can I at least leave my contact information? In case you change your mind." He withdrew a business card from his wallet, not a company card, I noted, but a personal one hastily printed. I accepted it mechanically, then reached for one of my own from the desk. After a moment's consideration, I handed it to him. "Goodbye, Dad." Sarah had already called security to escort him out, standard protocol for visitors without appointments. I watched from my office window as he exited the building below, card in hand, shoulders slightly hunched against the Michigan winter that had just begun to settle over the city. The conference call proceeded as scheduled. I participated fully, giving no indication of the emotional earthquake that had just occurred. Only after the day's meetings concluded, and I was alone in the car to the airport, did I allow myself to process the encounter. My phone rang as the driver navigated evening traffic. My mother's number appeared on the screen, the first direct call from her in over a year. I let it go to voicemail, then listened immediately. Zane, her voice wavered slightly. Your father told me. He saw you today. I didn't know you were in Michigan. Please call me before you leave. Please. I didn't return the call. Instead, I texted flying back to Austin tonight. We'll call tomorrow. The response came immediately. Promise. Promise, I replied, surprising myself with the commitment. As the plane lifted off from Detroit Metropolitan Airport, I looked down at the lights of the city growing distant below. Somewhere in that constellation of illumination was the house where I'd grown up, the family I'd left behind, and now the business I'd built partly to prove them wrong. The symmetry should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt hollow, a circle completed, but without the resolution I'd unconsciously sought. Success hadn't healed the original wound. It had merely built something valuable around it. The flight back to Austin gave me uninterrupted hours to process the unexpected encounter. My initial reaction had been protective anger, the same emotion that had propelled me through those early difficult years. But, as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, that anger began to transmute into something more complex. I had succeeded beyond what anyone, including myself, might have predicted. The company we'd built from nothing now employed hundreds of people, secured data for major corporations, and continued growing quarterly. By conventional metrics, I had won the unspoken competition with my family's expectations, yet the victory felt incomplete. Landing in Austin near midnight, I returned to my downtown condo exhausted. Julia had texted offering to bring breakfast before our morning executive meeting, a tradition whenever either of us traveled. I accepted gratefully, then fell into restless sleep. Morning arrived with Julia at my door carrying coffee and breakfast tacos. Her intuition about my state of mind was as always precise. You look like you've seen a ghost, she observed, setting breakfast on the kitchen counter. Detroit that bad? I recounted the encounter with my father while we ate, including his implied request for financial help and my non-committal response. What are you going to do? She asked when I finished. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore the whole situation. Let them figure it out just like I had to. Julia nodded, understanding the impulse. And the other part recognizes that responding with the same withholding they showed me just perpetuates the cycle. I sighed, pushing away my half-eaten breakfast. I don't want to be defined by their failures anymore, either by trying to prove them wrong or by repeating their patterns. So what does breaking the cycle look like to you? It was the perfect question, one that forced me to look beyond reaction to intention. What did I actually want from this situation? I promised my mother I'd call her today, I said finally. I'll start there. The executive meeting proceeded normally, though. Adam shot me concerned glances throughout. He knew about the Detroit encounter from my brief text the previous night, but didn't press for details in the group setting. After other executives filed out, he remained. You good? He asked simply. Getting there, I replied. Family complications. Need anything? I shook my head. Just time to think. I'll let you know. That evening, I made the promised call to my mother. She answered on the first ring, as though she'd been waiting beside the phone. Zane, she said, relief evident in her voice. Thank you for calling. I said I would, I replied, settling onto my balcony, overlooking the Austin skyline. You've said that before, she noted, gently reminding me of previous broken commitments. It was fair criticism. You're right. I'm sorry about that. The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd had in years. She explained her health situation, manageable, but chronic autoimmune issues, requiring ongoing treatment. She confirmed that Logan had returned home after losing his third job in 2 years, still accumulating debt faster than income. My father's unemployment had strained their finances to breaking point. I'm not asking for anything, Zane, she said carefully. I just wanted you to know where things stand. Why didn't you tell me about any of this sooner? I asked. Her silence spoke volumes before she finally answered. Pride. Shame. Knowing we hadn't been there for you when you needed us. The honesty was unexpected and disarming. I'd prepared for justifications, not accountability. I'd like to see you, I said impulsively. Just you. Coffee or lunch? Next time I'm in Michigan. I'd like that very much, she replied, emotion thickening her voice. We spoke for another hour about my company, about her volunteer work at the library, that continued despite her health challenges, about neutral topics that allowed us to reconnect without immediately confronting the deeper fractures. When we said goodbye, I felt something shift slightly within me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the precursor to it. The following week, I met with our company's financial advisor to discuss a matter unrelated to family. As our meeting concluded, I broached the personal topic. Hypothetically, if I wanted to help with medical expenses for someone, without them knowing the source, what would be the best approach? She considered briefly. A trust would work, administered by a third party who could pay medical providers directly. The beneficiary would know they were receiving assistance, but wouldn't necessarily know from whom unless you chose to reveal that. That afternoon, I initiated the process to establish such a trust for my mother's medical expenses. I specified that payments would go directly to healthcare providers, not to my parents' accounts. My name would not appear on any documentation they would see. For my father and Logan, I made a different decision. Financial assistance without accountability would only enable patterns that needed to change. Instead, I contacted a respected career counseling service in their area, anonymously prepaying for comprehensive services for both of them. Whether they would use these resources effectively was their choice, but I had offered a tool rather than a temporary solution. 3 weeks later, business took me to Chicago. I extended the trip to include a day in Michigan, meeting my mother at a quiet cafe halfway between her home and Detroit. The reunion was awkward initially, too much unspoken history crowding the small table between us. Gradually, as conversation continued, that tension eased. "Your medical bills?" I said carefully, as we finished our lunch. "Has anything changed with those recently?" Confusion crossed her features, then understanding. "You did that. The trust." I nodded, not specifying the extent of the arrangement. It seemed like the right thing to do. "Your father doesn't know," she said. "He thinks the insurance company reconsidered our appeals." "Good. Let's keep it that way." I paused, choosing words carefully. "Mom, I can help with your health care, but I'm not bailing out Dad or Logan. They need to make different choices, not just get temporary relief." She nodded slowly. "I understand. And I think that's fair." We parted with a genuine hug, the first in years that didn't feel forced or performative. I didn't ask to see my father or brother during that visit. Some boundaries needed to remain firm, at least for now. Back in Austin, life proceeded with its demanding rhythm of business growth and personal development. The company expanded into international markets, necessitating frequent travel and increasing responsibilities. Through it all, I maintained monthly calls with my mother and occasional coffee meetings when business brought me to the Midwest. A year after our reconnection, I received an unexpected email from Professor Harrington, my former academic advisor, who had helped me navigate the transition to part-time studies years earlier. "I hope this finds you well," he wrote. "I recently read about your company's success and remembered our conversations during your difficult period at university. I wondered if you might consider speaking to our current computer science students about your journey. Your perspective on overcoming obstacles would be invaluable." The invitation triggered complex emotions. Returning to campus meant confronting the physical space where much of my struggle had occurred. It also offered an opportunity to transform that difficult history into something potentially helpful for others. I accepted. The lecture hall was filled beyond capacity when I arrived for the scheduled talk. Professor Harrington introduced me with evident pride, outlining my academic and subsequent business achievements. Standing at the podium, looking out at students whose expressions ranged from curious to skeptical to openly admiring, I made a split-second decision to abandon my prepared remarks about business strategy and innovation. Success has many definitions. I began instead. For some of you, it might mean founding a company. For others, it might mean solving previously unsolvable problems, or creating technologies that improve lives, or simply finding work that brings personal fulfillment alongside financial stability. I shared my story, not the sanitized version prepared for business publications, but the honest account of financial struggles, family disappointment, and the painful lessons that shaped both my determination and my eventual approach to leadership. The hardest lesson I've learned, I told them as I concluded, is that success doesn't heal old wounds. It just gives you resources to address them differently. How you use those resources says more about you than the achievement itself ever could. After the presentation, a student approached me privately. He described family circumstances, eerily similar to mine parents, who prioritized his sister's education while expecting him to figure it out on his own. The familiar pain in his expression resonated deeply. "What would you have wanted someone to tell you when you were in my position?" he asked. I considered carefully before answering. That your worth isn't determined by other people's willingness to invest in you. That the self-reliance forced upon you now will become strength later, even though that's cold comfort in the present, and that you're not alone, even when it feels that way. That conversation catalyzed an idea that had been forming gradually. Within 3 months, our company established a scholarship program, specifically for students demonstrating academic promise, alongside significant financial need and limited family support. The selection committee included both financial aid officers and student counselors, trained to identify candidates in situations similar to what I had experienced. The first scholarships were awarded the following academic year. I attended the ceremony anonymously, sitting at the back of the auditorium, watching 5 students receive funding that would allow them to focus on studies rather than survival. The program wouldn't fix the systemic problems making education increasingly unaffordable, but for those specific individuals, it might shift the equation enough to create possibility where obstacle had existed. As our company approached its 7th anniversary, valued at over $100 million, and employing over 500 people across multiple offices, I found myself reflecting on the journey during a rare, quiet evening alone on my process balcony. The bitter young man who had fled Michigan with nothing but determination and talent had built something substantial. Not just a business, but a life with meaning beyond reaction to past hurts. My relationship with my mother had cautiously rebuilt itself into something genuine, if still bounded by certain limitations. My father and I maintained careful distance, though I heard through my mother that he had eventually found employment through the career counseling service I had anonymously provided. Logan remained. Logan chronically underemployed, but seemingly content with his reduced expectations. I had accepted that some relationships would never provide what I had once hoped for, and that acceptance itself was a form of freedom. The next morning, I arrived early at our Austin headquarters for the quarterly board meeting. Before others arrived, I stood alone in the conference room, looking at the company logo, displayed prominently on the wall, the visual representation of everything we had built. The logo's design incorporated elements suggesting both protection and transparency values central to our security technology, but also, I realized, to the personal philosophy that had emerged from my experiences. Protection of what matters without hiding behind walls. Transparency that allows genuine connection without vulnerability to exploitation. Boundaries that define rather than isolate. As board members began arriving, I greeted them with the particular confidence that comes not from achievement alone, but from clarity about what that achievement represents and requires. My worth was not defined by my family's recognition or by the company's valuation, but by the integrity with which I navigated both success and the wounds that partly motivated it. The true measurement of success, I had come to understand, wasn't proving wrong those who had undervalued you. It was creating value that spoke for itself in business, in relationships, in how you treated others facing challenges similar to those you had overcome. When the board meeting concluded successfully, I returned to my office to find a small package delivered from Michigan. Inside was a flash drive and note from my mother. Found these old photos while cleaning. Thought you might want them. The drive contained scanned images from my childhood moments of genuine connection, before dynamics soured reminders that imperfect family stories contain chapters worth preserving alongside those better left behind. I looked out my office window at the Austin skyline, then back at the childhood image on my screen. Both were real. Both were part of my story. The journey between them had been neither straight nor simple, but it had led to a place where I could acknowledge both without being defined by either. What's your story of overcoming obstacles within your own family? Have you ever had to prove yourself to people who should have believed in you from the start? Leave a comment below about how you handled similar situations in your own life. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and success against the odds. Remember that sometimes the people who understand your worth the least help you discover it the most. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength in writing your own success story, whatever form it takes.